I'm ready for prison. Makebi Zulu's bold stand on Edgar Lungu's burial rites. Good day, viewers. Welcome to InspirAfrica Official. Tonight, Zambia watches in disbelief as one man stands at the edge of the law, not for power, not for profit, but for what he calls the dignity of a fallen president. Makebi Zulu, Edgar Lungu's most loyal defender, has drawn a line in the sand, vowing to face prison if that's what it takes to grant the former head of state a dignified burial. But what does this defiance really mean? Is this about loyalty or rebellion? And could Makebi's stand ignite a new wave of political confrontation between the Lungu family and President Hakainde Hichilema's administration? Stay with us, because what's unfolding could redefine Zambia's post-Lungu era. The tension surrounding Edgar Lungu's burial has reached boiling point. From South Africa's court standoffs to Zambia's legal pushbacks, every decision has carried echoes of politics, power, and unfinished legacy. Now, Makebi Zulu, lawyer, former minister, and one of Lungu's most visible allies, says he's ready for prison rather than see the late president denied his final dignity. In this report, we break down what triggered Makebi's explosive statement, the hidden legal and political stakes behind Lungu's burial rites, and why this moment could mark a turning point in Zambia's political landscape heading toward 2026. Makebi Zulu has taken a bold stand, declaring he's ready to go to prison if that's what it takes to secure Edgar Lungu's dignified burial. In this gripping exposé, InspirAfrica Official uncovers the deeper meaning behind Makebi's defiance, the legal battles over Lungu's burial, and what this confrontation reveals about Zambia's shifting power dynamics ahead of 2026. Is this an act of loyalty, or a last stand for justice? Join us as we unpack the story shaking Zambia's political core, where legacy, law, and loyalty collide. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share tea. The revelation came to light in the early hours of June 5, 2025, when news broke that Zambia's sixth president, Edgar Lungu, had died in Pretoria, South Africa, where he had been receiving treatment for an undisclosed illness. He had previously undergone treatment for achalasia, a condition affecting the esophagus. But what should have been a straightforward state funeral quickly descended into one of the most controversial burial disputes in modern African politics. Within days of his death, tensions emerged between the Zambian government under President Hakainde Hichilema and the Lungu family. The government announced plans for a state funeral with full presidential honors at Embassy Park in Lusaka, the designated burial ground for former Zambian presidents, following the precedent set by Kenneth Kaunda. But the Lungu family had other plans. Through their spokesperson, Makebi Zulu, a lawyer and aspiring presidential candidate, they announced that the late president had left explicit instructions. He wanted a private burial in South Africa, and under no circumstances was President Hichilema to attend his funeral. Initial negotiations began with former Malawian President Bakili Muluzi attempting to mediate between the two sides. According to Zulu, these talks yielded no positive outcome. The family accused the government of deceit and betrayal during negotiations. By late June, specifically on the 24th and 25th, the Zambian government took the extraordinary step of approaching South African courts, seeking an interdict to prevent the family from proceeding with a private burial. The state filed for 4 principal reliefs: a declaratory order affirming exclusive rights to repatriate the body, a mandatory order compelling the funeral home to release the body to the Zambian High Commission, authorization for an official state delegation to accompany the body, and critically, the exclusion of the family's decision-making authority over the repatriation and burial process. On June 25, 2025, the Pretoria High Court issued a temporary order halting any burial plans pending the outcome of legal proceedings. The body of Edgar Lungu remained in a South African morgue as lawyers battled in court. Throughout July and into August, the legal tug-of-war intensified. On Monday, August 4, 2025, the Pretoria High Court concluded oral arguments, with judgment expected by Friday, August 8. And then came the ruling. On August 8, the Pretoria High Court ordered that Edgar Lungu's body be repatriated to Zambia for a state funeral and burial in Lusaka, overriding the family's wishes. The court dismissed the family's arguments, citing national interest and protocol. But Makebi Zulu was not backing down. He immediately announced plans to appeal to the South African Supreme Court of Appeal, declaring that if necessary, the family was prepared to keep the body in the morgue for 10 years. Let's hear directly from the key players in this extraordinary drama. Their words paint a vivid picture of the battle lines drawn over Edgar Lungu's final resting place. Makebi Zulu, speaking on Emmanuel Mwamba's EMV podcast, laid out the family's conditions with crystal clarity. If last night the President Hakainde Hichilema said, "I will not attend Mr. Lungu's burial. I will hand over to the Vice President, and we will give him his full honors and all. Tomorrow we would start off to come to Zambia. It is that simple." He continued, his voice steady with conviction. "That is why we are saying let us pray for the government so that reason prevails over self or ego, and the wishes of the family are respected." And then came the declaration that would become the headline heard across Southern Africa. "I am ready to go to prison for fighting to ensure ECL's wish for a dignified burial is granted." Speaking on South African broadcaster SABC on July 3, 2025, Zulu painted a picture of broken trust. The relationship between the Lungu family and the government had broken down, making such an arrangement unacceptable. The Zambian government showed deceit during earlier negotiations. The decision to take the matter to court effectively blocked any further dialogue. Former Malawian President Bakili Muluzi initially led the mediation efforts, but the talks yielded no positive outcome. He added, "The body of the late president belongs to the family, not the state, especially since Mr. Lungu." On the matter of dignity, Zulu was unequivocal. Speaking to Africa News, he stated, "This is an opportunity for us to tell a story, a great story of President Edgar Lungu, how that he lived as a president, served the nation as a president, and thereafter he was a person that was betrayed by the system, cast aside by the system. Now in his death they wish to come back and pretend as though they took care of him, pretend as though they were good to him." His voice carried the weight of accusation. President Hakainde Hichilema is incapable of giving President Edgar Lungu a dignified send-off. It would be a mockery. Following the Pretoria High Court ruling in August, Zulu characterized the government's legal approach with a sporting metaphor. They are playing rugby in a game of football. The government is attempting to seize control of a deeply personal and national process, effectively sidelining the family under the guise of state protocol. That is neither legally sound nor morally acceptable. He challenged the government's claims of a prior agreement. If the government truly believed an agreement existed, they should have asked the court to enforce it. Instead, they are seeking brand new orders, trying to reframe the dispute into something the family never consented to. "We had a private jet on standby. The state is now trying to reverse roles entirely." On South Africa's Newsroom Africa, Zulu made clear the family's bottom line. The family's goal is simple: a dignified send-off. That cannot be guaranteed if the very people accused of violating his rights in life are put in charge of his burial in death. And on the question of time, he was philosophical. If it takes longer, so be it. What matters most is dignity, both for the family and for President Lungu. That dignity will not be traded for expedience or political theater. He went further, making a shocking declaration. If the court is going to take longer, the family is willing to wait until he is given what is deemed a dignified burial, not a mockery. If it means keeping the body of Lungu for 10 years, we will do so. The government's position was articulated through Attorney General Mulalo Kabesha, who argued, "The burial of former presidents is a state matter. There is precedent set by President Kenneth Kanda's burial at Embassy Park." This case raises profound questions that extend far beyond one family's grief or one nation's protocol. At its heart lies a fundamental tension in African governance. Where does state authority end and family autonomy begin? The legal dimension. Legal experts point to the unprecedented nature of this case. The central question before South African courts is whether a foreign government can compel the repatriation of a deceased former leader against the express wishes of the family. The Pretoria High Court ruled in favor of state protocol and national interest, but the family's appeal to the Supreme Court of Appeal will test whether individual dignity and family rights can supersede matters of state. The government's 4 reliefs sought in court were extraordinary: exclusive rights to repatriation, mandatory release from the funeral home, authorization of a state delegation, and critically, the complete exclusion of family decision-making. As Zulu characterized it, this amounts to legal overreach and a fundamental misunderstanding of both procedure and principle. The political dimension. The political subtext cannot be ignored. Edgar Lungu lost the presidency to Hakainde Hichilema in 2021. After his defeat, Lungu re-entered active politics despite the loss of presidential benefits for former heads of state who returned to political life. The government stripped him of those benefits, a move that Lungu himself had previously dismissed as peanuts. This history has led many observers to question whether the burial dispute is genuinely about protocol or whether it's the continuation of political warfare by other means. Critics of the Lungu family suggest they are leveraging the death of former 6th President ECL to channel their anger and dissatisfaction, not merely because the government stripped him of his presidential benefits, but due to the resentment stemming from corruption allegations and the appropriation of their assets. Conversely, the family accuses the government of seeking to use a state funeral as propaganda, a way to pretend as though they took care of him after allegedly betraying him in life. The Makebi Zulu factor. Perhaps no figure in this saga has attracted more scrutiny than Makebi Zulu himself. At once a lawyer, family spokesperson, and declared presidential aspirant, his multiple roles have raised eyebrows across Zambia. Critics accuse him of using the burial impasse to boost his own political profile. Makebi Zulu is playing politics and using the burial impasse to win favors over other PF presidential aspirants, one commentary noted. He wants to ride on the Lungu name to gain popularity. Now he's campaigning for 2026 from South Africa next to the body. Another observer was more blunt. This Makebi boy is too pompous. He is misleading these poor women during this dark period. What he is doing is totally insane and very wrong. Meanwhile, Makebi is fattening his bank account with his senseless legal advice to the poor family members. Remember, he's a lawyer. The longer he prolongs this issue, the more money in his pocket. Supporters, however, see Zulu as a principled advocate willing to face prison to defend the family's wishes. His declaration of readiness for imprisonment has resonated with those who view the government's actions as overreach. Cultural and constitutional questions. The case has also reopened debates about cultural practices versus constitutional rights. In African tradition, families generally have the final say in burial arrangements. Yet modern state structures claim that former heads of state, by virtue of their service, belong to the nation. Where is the balance? Can a family's grief and a deceased person's final wishes be simply overridden because of an office once held? Or does national interest genuinely supersede individual autonomy, even in death? The diplomatic angle. The involvement of South African courts has added an international dimension. South Africa finds itself mediating between a foreign government's demands and a family's rights within its borders. The case has implications for diplomatic relations between Zambia and South Africa. Zulu acknowledged this tension. If that is going to disturb the diplomatic relations, then the family will proceed in a very private manner. The family respects the will of the South African people and would not want to antagonize the relations between South Africa and Zambia. Public opinion. Zambian public opinion appears divided. Some view the family's stance as petty and childish, a refusal to let go driven by political malice. Others see it as a legitimate fight against government overreach and a defense of human dignity. One online commenter captured the government supporters' frustration. One wonders what point they are trying to prove. Just petty and childish. Insults and performances. If it's about the money they have, let them explain how they got the money. Meanwhile, family supporters frame this as a matter of principle. National healing begins when personal interests give way to collective dignity. The unresolved questions. As this case heads to appeal, several questions remain unanswered. What exactly were the terms of the alleged agreement between the government and the family? Why has no written evidence of this agreement been produced? What were Edgar Lungu's actual final wishes? And are they documented? And fundamentally, in the 21st century, who has the ultimate authority over a body? Family or state? Thank you so much for watching today's edition of InspirAfrica Official. This story is far from over. As Edgar Chagwa Lungu's body remains in a South African morgue, awaiting the outcome of legal appeals, the questions raised by this case continue to reverberate across the continent. This is about more than one burial. It's about power, dignity, legacy, and the limits of state authority. What do you think? Is the Zambian government right to insist on a state funeral, or does the family have the ultimate say in how their loved one is laid to rest? Is Makebi Zulu a principled defender of dignity or a political opportunist exploiting a family's grief? And should a former president's final wishes be honored even when they conflict with state protocol? I want to hear from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's have a respectful but honest conversation about this complex issue. If you found this documentary informative, please hit that like button, share it with your networks, and subscribe to InspirAfrica Official so you don't miss our next deep dive into the stories shaping our continent. We'll be back tomorrow with more news, more analysis, and more stories that matter. Until then, I'm Nakash, reminding you to stay informed, stay engaged, and keep inspiring Africa. Take care, and see you in the next one.